Well, in the West, for many, many years, it was true that pollution came along as an inevitable side effect of industrialization. But that's not true anymore for two reasons. One, technology exists today that is much cleaner than the West had available when it was in the process of industrialization. And many of these technologies, including wind and solar, are manufactured in China. China actually leads the world right now in wind and solar power. The other reason why it's no longer necessary that pollution and industrialization go hand in hand is policies. In the West, there have been many tried and true policies that China is now adapting to its own conditions, including things, market mechanisms like cap and trade policies, like incentives for clean production, that make it possible for China to decouple its energy use, its dirty energy use in particular, from its economic growth. Public concern about air quality is an enormous problem for the Chinese government, and it has only become so in recent years as the public gained more information about the impact, about the levels of air pollution in their communities and the impact of that on their health. And it really has reached a point where concern over air pollution throughout the country is threatening China's social stability. That makes it a real problem, and it has, for that reason, become a top priority of the Chinese government. One example of this public concern is the documentary on air pollution, Under the Dome, that was released last year and attracted some 200 to 300 million viewers around the country in just the first few days before it was shut down by the government. That caused quite a bit of concern, even though the government itself, the head of the Ministry of Environmental Protection, had called this documentary China's Silent Spring. But I do think that the level of interest and concern was of some, surprise to the government. In the past few years, yes, and it actually was driven by the U.S. Embassy in Beijing that put an air quality monitor on the roof of the embassy in order to provide information for the embassy employees and their families. That rapidly became apparent that information was different from what the government was providing to its Chinese citizens. And there were several very influential, wealthy Chinese developers who took that information, put it on their own website. So it became very hard for the government to keep that information from being very widely available to the public. So it actually decided at that point to develop a system, nationwide system, of real-time air quality monitoring information that is now available in every major Chinese city. And anybody around the world can, I do it every day, go on the app and see what the air quality is in any major city. Well, China has developed legislation. It revised its longstanding Air Pollution Prevention and Control Act, went into effect early this year. It also announced a nationwide air pollution prevention and control plan in 2013 when the air apocalypse really caught the attention of the nation and the world. And in addition, China is doing a lot outside of legislation and outside of this air quality plan to develop a new economic model, because what is come to happen, I think, is that the Chinese government realizes that it can no longer continue with its current economic model that is focused heavily on heavy industry and on exports because of the impact of air pollution on its citizens and that resulting lack of social stability. And so China is in the midst of developing a very different economic model that accepts a slower rate of economic growth, but better quality growth. And they see that as a way also of avoiding the middle income trap that their current model was leading them towards. And so what they are doing is a very intentional effort to close down coal mines, which coal is responsible for about half of the most damaging form of air pollution in China, and also 80% of its CO2 emissions. China has put a moratorium on coal plants. It is shutting down overcapacity in many iron, steel, and cement industries, and in doing so, it has actually brought down coal consumption last year by about 5%, while its economy continued to grow. And now the extent of the growth is always subject to some debate. But the fact is that China has begun that process of decarbonization. Air pollution has had a negative impact on how China is viewed by other countries, and I think it was most vividly illustrated by the 2008 Olympics. For many, many years before that, China had been able to clear the air through some very, draconian measures before any major event or anniversary. But for the Olympics, they were very surprised. They couldn't quite reach that level of clean air in time for the Olympics to start. So, for example, the marathon to the Great Wall from Beijing was a serious black eye for the Chinese government. Many elite runners did not participate. Others got sick along the route. The air pollution in China is also having an impact on China's tourism rates. It's also having an impact on the willingness of international expats to stay in China, to work for international organizations. And in general, it has had a particularly negative impact, along with the fact that China's CO2 emissions have been now the largest in the world, more than the US and the EU combined. But I do think it's important to recognize that China is bringing down its coal consumption and that air pollution rates have dropped ever so slightly in 2015. I think they are on the right path, but I don't think that message has gotten across to the world yet because of the episodes of smog that continue to plague Beijing and other major cities.